I wanted to do this video. I was originally at first going to put this video up, or what I'm going to talk about in my show tonight, but I decided that this is probably a little bit more bigger than putting it in a show and giving it, time that would be robbed of, so I'm just going to talk about it. I am sure that a lot of wrestling fans last night watched the piece on E60 on ESPN about Scott Hall, and it was entitled "The Wrestler." And I gotta say, ESPN, they did a good job. I want to say really good job, but somebody's going to be like, oh, they didn't do that good of a job. So I'm just going to say they did a good job. To us, the fans who have known about this downfall for so long, it's a story that, we'll hear again and again and again. But to somebody who watches sports but doesn't watch wrestling and watched this story last night, I would imagine that they were just absolutely shocked by, just the decline, the downfall of this one guy. They really did a good job picking the people that they had for the interview, Bischoff, Kevin Nash, Sean Waltman, Hogan, Stephanie McMahon. There are a couple of other people I don't really remember. One comment that really got me last night watching that was the comment that Sean Waltman made, saying how he's been preparing for Scott Hall's death for the last year and a half. That's pretty messed up. That really is. To say, I know my friend's going to die. I'm expecting this to happen. It's going to happen. I've been waiting a year and a half for this. And I remember reading in an article where Kevin Nash talked about how he's been saving, like voicemail messages that Scott Hall has sent because he's never sure when the last time, he's going to talk to Scott Hall and, before he passes away. The story, the whole story is very interesting. And it actually, it started with Scott Hall talking about how his dad was an alcoholic, his grandparents were alcoholics. Basically, he comes from a line of alcoholics. And his dad said that you're going to fall flat on your face. And then there was an incident that took place in 1983, which I never heard of, because, as a fan, you hear all these different stories about these certain guys. But I never heard this story of this incident in Florida at this club called the Dollhouse. Scott Hall was working one night, and he got into this confrontation with a customer. Well, the customer left the place, and he started breaking the windows on Scott Hall's car. So he goes out, the guy pulls a gun, they have a back and forth fight. Hall then gets the gun and then shoots the guy, and he kills him. He was then charged for second degree assault. I know it was second degree. I don't remember exactly what it was. But, they ended up having, no trial at all because of insufficient evidence. And basically, Scott Hall, plus it was in self-defense, too. So, Scott Hall killed a guy. I never knew that. And then, they showed him in AWA when he started in '84, and how ripped he looked. And he looked a little bit like Tom Selleck, a little bit. And then he talked about when he met Vince, when he met him, and basically created the Razor Ramon character. There was just a lot of stuff, that, and they talked to his ex-wife. They were married for 8 years, had 2 kids. The oldest son is 20, and I'll talk about him momentarily. Because in WWF, that was really where his name began to become big. And, the Razor Ramon character, Scott Hall, had like a 3.5-year run in the WWF. At the time that he had left the company, he had set the record for most reigns as Intercontinental Champion. And really, in a way, looking back at it now, should have had at least one run with the title, with the WWF title. He was so popular. He should have had a run with the belt. And then, he goes over to WCW, and then around 98, 97, 98, that's where everything really starts to fall down, with the drugs and the booze. He and his wife get a divorce. He doesn't see his kids. And then he comes back to WWF in 2002, only to get released like 3 months after he's there. And then Stephanie admits that of all the people that they've, had people go to rehab, he's the one that they have spent the most money on, going into 6 figures. Now, she didn't give an amount, but, went into the 6 figures. And then it's just like Scott Hall's life just has gone down. It really is sad. And then they talked about how he had a seizure and then he going to the hospital. And then there was a rumor that he was going to commit suicide. And then they showed the piece where he went to an independent show in Fall River, Massachusetts. And the promoter of the show talked about how when Scott Hall got out of the airplane, because he had checked himself out that day to get to the airport, to get to the show, the first thing he said was, "I want my money." It could have been him drunk, could have been him drugged, whatever. And then, the promoter just decides, well, you know what, if you're going to be that way, if you're going to act that way, I'm just going to put you out there. And he just looked so terrible. It was so sad. And then when he was trying to cut a promo, this one fan, yelled out basically, "You relapsed." And Scott Hall's like, "No, I didn't relapse." And it's just so sad. And then his oldest child, his oldest son, Cody, who's 20 years old, decides that he wants to help his father. And, we get this, happy ending, sort of, to like, well, maybe there's a chance Scott Hall will clean himself up. Well, unfortunately, and this news came up today on TMZ, his wife, Dana, said that the two are no longer in speaking terms. And this is from TMZ. We're told Cody gave up on his dad due to, quote, constant verbal abuse from Scott while he was binging, and he soon moved back home with his mom. Dana tells us Cody simply felt it was too hard seeing his dad in that kind of state. We're told Cody has no current plans to continue wrestling. Scott's rep had no comment. And it's so weird, because that is out of The Wrestler, the movie, with the daughter and Randy the Ram. But here's the thing, because ever since the movie came out, ever since The Wrestler came out, everyone has been asking, who is The Wrestler? Who is this guy who, was once main eventing, making all this money, and, drugs and alcohol got him? And I'm sure some people were saying, that's Scott Hall. That's Scott Hall. Well, I'm going to tell you, folks, it's not Scott Hall. It's not. We could say, it could be 5, 6 guys, Some will probably say, oh, it's Scott Hall. Some will probably say it's Jake Roberts. Some will say it's Ric Flair. Some will say it's this guy. Some will say it's that guy. But the fact is, you know, if there was a guy, if there was a wrestler that inspired the character of Randy the Ram and the Wrestler, we'll never know. But to say that Scott Hall is the wrestler, I gotta disagree. I really gotta disagree. I mean, there have been so many guys who, you know, had alcohol issues, who've had drug issues. Some of them have had both, like Scott Hall has. And, I mean, like I said, this was a very well done, you know, piece that they did. And, you know, unfortunately, it shows a dark side of wrestling, but in a way, it has to be shown, and it's a very good, you know, sort of a public service announcement to, you know, the kids that want to grow up to be professional wrestlers. Don't do drugs, don't do alcohol, don't do both, because you could end up like Scott Hall, unfortunately. And sadly, that's what has ended up happening to him, and, you know, it's like, we're all expecting, when is he going to die? When is he going to die? When is he going to die? You know, and who knows? I honestly thought last night after I watched that piece that I'd find out today that Scott Hall had died, you know, but like I said, all in all, it was a very good piece. It was very well done. But, you know, what else is there to say? What else is there to say about this topic and Scott Hall? I mean, we could all talk about this, you know, 1,000 different ways, but at the end of the day, I mean, Scott Hall made the choices, and in a way, I guess the best way to put it is what Eric Bischoff said in that interview last night. Wrestling isn't killing Scott Hall. Scott Hall is killing Scott Hall.